Welcome to a new vision of reality, TSK for the 21st century, our new series on the time-space knowledge vision. TSK starts from the radical suggestion that deep, open-ended, sustained inquiry into time, space, and knowledge, as fundamental facets or elements of our being, can have a profoundly transformative impact on our ways of being and knowing in the world. Many in our time, as we are moving into the third decade of the 21st century, feel that we're caught up rather surprisingly in various crises of meaning and sense-making. And I've long felt that TSK is powerfully resonant with and relevant to the various integral, metamodern, and other communities attempting to address these crises. So I wanted to open up a series where we could explore TSK retrospectively, considering its origins and intentions, and prospectively, in light of what wisdom and ways of working it might offer us going forward. For the 7th episode of A New Vision of Reality, I'm pleased to welcome Morgan Wells, a lawyer, a Buddhist and TSK practitioner, and director of the TSK-inspired Center for Creative Inquiry. All right, well, welcome, Morgan. I'm happy to be able to talk with you today.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah, of the people I've spoken to, you're the first one really I haven't had a chance to meet with in person. I met you actually through this series, and I came to learn that you're working with CCI, and I'm really interested in hearing more about the work that you're doing with that. And so, yeah, I just wanted to find out really first, for you, what came first? Was it your involvement with the Center for Creative Inquiry, or was it TSK?
Oh, that's interesting. So I might have been involved with Center for Creative Inquiry first, but I didn't know it at the time. I'd moved to California to study Buddhism at the Nyingma Institute, and I was working at the Tibetan Aid Project at the time. And so through my studies at the Nyingma Institute, I met Jack Petranker, the founder of Center for Creative Inquiry. And so my first real point of diving into TSK was actually a week-long retreat with Jack Petranker. And that was back in 2007 or 2008 or something like that. And so I'm not 100% sure whether that was a Center for Creative Inquiry retreat or through a different organization. But yeah, it was through Jack. So kind of both at the same time. I got introduced, to TSK through Jack.
Great. I don't remember exactly, but I do think just around that time, Jack was just launching CCI.
Mm-hmm.
There had been, of course, TSK classes through Nyingma Institute and independently and things like that. But I think he was just getting that rolling. I attended some retreats around that time and remember him talking about getting this moving and hopefully being able to fold in a lot of the TSK work into the organization. Where did you do the retreat with him?
It was at Ratna Ling Retreat Center in Cazadero, California, up in the northern California redwood trees. It's a beautiful place.
Really is. Yeah, that's where I've done a number of retreats with him as well. It's a gorgeous place up there.
Mm-hmm. And it was my first time up there too. So it was a good introduction. We'll say it that way.
There's just the big blue sky and the mountainscape and the quiet. It's really a great place for any kind of retreat, but also for really, I think, tapping into a sense of spaciousness and a different sense of time.
Absolutely. Yes. I remember stepping outside because it was a gorgeous time of year, and we did a lot of practices outdoors at the time. And I just remember kind of being led in a practice that was, kind of having us expand space in all directions, and then just being able to feel the entire expanse of that big blue sky above me was quite, it was an experience that I think helped bring me along to the point I am today. Just a good start, I would say.
Wonderful. Yeah, just talking about it makes me miss being there. It's been a few years.
Yeah.
So just looking back at your your life, before you got involved here, did you have any, spiritual interests or, interest in human potential or transformation that, emerged for you early on growing up? Or, were there any particularly formative experiences or questions for you growing up?
Yeah. So I think really, and I don't really recall if there was a defining moment, but I do know that early on, when I was probably back to when I was like 12 or 13 years old, I was very interested in religion and philosophy and just different ways of viewing the world. And so I mostly just read books and really enjoyed reading books about Eastern religions and Eastern philosophy too. And that carried over to my undergraduate experience, where I was able to take different religion courses as a religion major at my university. And I particularly was interested in Buddhism, Hinduism, and those types of worldviews. And so then, really after college, I wasn't necessarily looking for specifically a spiritual experience, but the kind of the way I stumbled into this life was I was kind of desperately looking for a job after graduation. And I was on this website, I think it was like backdoorjobs.com or something. And it was build a Buddhist temple in Sonoma County. And I thought that was cool. So I looked into that and, reached out and said, oh, great. So do you need anyone with academic skills? And they said, well, this is mostly construction, so no. But we have this center, this Buddhist center in Berkeley called the Nyingma Institute that you should check out. They have needs for kind of more administrative and academic skills like that. And so I applied there and ended up kind of moving out just the following summer after graduation. So I started young. I was 22 years old and moved into a Buddhist center to live and work full time. So really, Buddhism and the kind of secular teachings of Tarthang Tulku, I was kind of exploring at the same time, and it took a few months for me to really encounter the TSK teachings. But when I did encounter those, they kind of deeply resonated with me, and so that's how I kind of developed on this path of TSK.
Was that the temple? Was it a temple out at Odeon, or what were you first looking at?
It was Odeon. Yeah, well, it was Odeon.
Wonderful. Yeah, that would be quite an experience to be there and take part in that. I think one of our mutual friends, Steve Randall, did quite a bit for that in the early days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very impressive. Later on, I did eventually get there and get to see it, but it took a few years after that initial spark that led me to the broader organization.
Now that you've been working in this environment and exposed to TSK, what would you say the role that TSK plays in your life is now? Is it central to your practice, or is it a peripheral practice among other things that you're doing, or how do you hold it and relate to it?
Well, it's interesting. I think a lot of the practice that I engage with has a TSK flavor, and at the same time, there are kind of other kind of secular teachings that kind of have also played a central role. So I would say, in addition to TSK, the other kind of practice path that I engage with is called skillful means. Mm-hmm. And it's another teaching of Tarthang Tulku, really trying to take work and your daily activity and actions as your spiritual practice, which I find very compatible with TSK, which is also really about kind of taking your experience and like using experience as a way to really explore your view of being and view of reality. And so they really kind of go together for me, and those two ways of practicing really seem to be, I wouldn't even say for me, not only complementary, but really kind of inseparable. I sometimes I'll drift into a skillful means teaching and then drift into a TSK teaching in terms of my descriptions, and because they really kind of have a lot in common for me.
Yeah, I feel deep synergy between them.
Mm-hmm.
What was your academic background before coming into this?
In undergraduate school, I was a dual major in English and religion, English writing. So it was a creative writing major. Poetry was my focus, and then religion, which actually ended up being a religion minor because I didn't complete the final paper I was supposed to. So ended up being a English major, religion minor in the end. But after that, I said, yeah, my personal story. I was working for Tibetan Aid Project and studying at the Enigma Institute for a while. And then I went to UC Davis Law School. And so that's really my background now, is I'm a lawyer. So.
Great. Okay. Oh, I have some similarity there. I was a creative writing major with a religious studies minor in my undergraduate.
Oh, wow. That is exactly the same.
Yeah. My focus was on poetry also, and the religions I focused on mostly were Buddhist and Hindu traditions, but others as well. So probably significant overlap there. And I was urged to be a lawyer after that. I'm sure that my wife wished I had gone on to do that. It would be more lucrative than being a university teacher. But I didn't do that. So you've mentioned, being attracted to kind of the secular dimension of the teachings in terms of skillful means and TSK. What have you found especially useful or engaging or valuable about the TSK vision and its particular, you could say, maybe this worldly or secular framing?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's directly responsive, but I'll kind of try to do the question justice. I would say with TSK, I think it really has a very strong resonance with me in kind of on I would say like an ethical dimension or in a moral dimension, as well as kind of in terms of striving for personal growth, or maybe even letting go of the striving for personal growth. That really plays a strong role for me. And I can give an example of just, I think in the things I care about in the world, like trying to like kind of really hone in on like, what do I value? What is important to me? What matters? And really trying, when I centering that and trying to allow my actions to kind of be a gesture towards those intentions and actions whenever I can, and I think it really is for me like this skillful means practices and TSK practices that can bring me back to that center of like what do I care about, what's valuable, what's meaningful. And I think in terms of the world too, especially the way things have been going. I think it's a tough time right now, and a lot of people are really engaging with really kind of fundamental questions and having their worldviews challenged and having some of their concepts of right and wrong and identities challenged. And I think TSK and secular practice can really help. I don't want to say ground, because in some way it's groundless, but really help calm and allow there to be like a foundation of stillness to really engage those questions in a way that feels safe, that doesn't kind of lead to maybe as much existential dread as maybe tackling them head on, and really I think just allowing allowing ourselves to engage in questions in a way that's playful but still engaged, not having to equate engagement with, okay, I have to be right all the time. I have to be in this fixed position where, this is the correct camp to be in, and if I kind of like deviate from that path, I'm like undermining the system, or I'm, or playing into roles. It loosens all that up. It's just like, okay, we can ask questions, we can still engage, we can still do good, but let's like engage in a little bit of a softer way, in a more playful way, and let go of some of these structures that we've really seem to be cause more anxiety than anything else.
I think that's really well put. When I teach some university classes that involve some TSK practice in them, for whatever reason, actually, it's usually the women in the class who respond most enthusiastically about the teachings, more than the guys in the class, for whatever reason. But two things that they've often remarked to me about that are, one, right in the midst of ordinary experience, TSK can kind of rekindle a sense of magic and possibility. It can kind of thaw the fixedness around the way that we take things to be, and to allow for more fluidity, a sense of magic and possibility in there. And I think also this challenging of presuppositions, and allowing you to engage with your experience and your frames in a more creative way, in a playful way. So that really mirrors some of what you said. And now that I'm thinking about it, a lot of the students who've responded positively are also students who tend to be fairly active socially. So I think there is this strong element there of what TSK makes possible. In your own work with TSK, have you found anything to be especially challenging about it? Any aspects of the vision or the practices that have been challenging?
Like, I think a lot about TSK is challenging, but I'm trying do you mean more challenging in the sense of how to like understanding it and executing it, or like executing a practice, or more challenging in the sense of like challenging my presuppositions and worldviews and that sort of challenging?
Actually, both, because I think it has all of the above in it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think on the first level, I would say, the TSK books are challenging, and some of that challenge is what can be kind of fun in reading them, and I think it is something that in itself, the challenge of the language and the vocabulary really does kind of loosen up some of our kind of like tendencies to want to always like, let's reconcile this, let's resolve this, let's make sure there's a label that applies so that everything is lined up in this nice little kind of linear story, that everything fits together in a way that makes sense. And it's if that's your way of engaging, and it's all of our ways of engaging probably, but if you're engaging the material with that type of conceptual rigidity, either maybe you need an intellectual capacity beyond mine, but I don't even know if it would be possible, like to really try to like line up TSK and summarize it in a way that would make a coherent sense. Mm-hmm. I haven't gotten there yet, and I've been practicing it, almost 15 years. So, yeah, but so I think that is challenging, and I think that's fun. I think that challenge is fun, because in some ways that grappling, that playing with it, that just like what the heck is this? Let's explore it further. I don't know that. It's okay to not know something. It's okay to not have everything totally figured out. That just points to ways, exactly the places where we can look and explore further. So yeah, I do think I find many things challenging in the TSK books, and And that's one of the best things about it. And also, I think there is sometimes a moment where you're doing some of the practices, and it's very easy to start getting too literal about the instruction, or get kind of conceptually bogged down in what something is. It's like, okay, so I'm taking a moment, and then there's another moment, and I'm trying to split the moment. So is there space between this moment? What does that mean? And I think sometimes when engaging in practice, it changes every time, but sometimes that is kind of how it goes. Of just like, okay, I don't know if I'm okay. Now I'm in a space. All right. and then there's sometimes where maybe you just let some of that go, and you just kind of sink in, and just, I'm doing something. Maybe something is going on, and it feels kind of natural and fine. And that's, both experiences are equally valid. So yeah, I think that's challenging too. But then on the other level, I would say there are some things about TSK that can be challenging for me personally, in terms of applying it, or how others are applying it and things. I get concerned sometimes that TSK could be applied in a way that results in spiritual bypassing people's concerns, like almost any spiritual path that can happen, but or secular path or spiritual path. But kind of basically taking this position, and it's a position, so that's why I'm like, it's not really TSK, but taking a position that, okay, well, now we're like transcending everything. So we're transcending content. And so this concern that you've brought about, the way the world is treating you, and the way, like, I don't have to listen to that because there's some higher level where there's a way to just like get over the content. And I think that can be, I think that's a very comfortable position to take, that doesn't necessarily, that isn't itself kind of like a closed position, where it's like, well, like if you had been in the world in a different way and had created different labels, created different stories, that might not actually make sense. And so trying to stay open, and part of my practice is always like trying to stay open to the possibility and question that, like, those walls I've created for myself, that little box, that boxed in world that I've decided is like the right, kind of like way of seeing things, and allowing those challenges to come in, and allowing other views to come in, and letting that be another exploration in the unknown.
Yeah, all of that's really resonant for me. And I can see how TSK, the way it's written, where it's even deliberately, playfully self-undermining or self-contradictory in places. It works with illusion and evocation more than laying out any kind of systematic vision or set of fixed definitions. Could be frustrating to somebody who really is looking for particular formulaic truth that they can hold on to in a secure way. I'm wondering, do you feel like your training as a poet maybe prepared you to read TSK in a way that can appreciate it and kind of crack it and enjoy the fruits there?
I'll say yes and no. I'll say yes in that I think whatever experiences we bring in, whatever fields of knowledge we can bring in to the study, can be a fruitful tool to crack into TSK, so to speak, and to engage. And it's really one of the things that, in terms of CCI, is trying to do now, is just to kind of like widen those fields of engagement, because there's so many different knowledges we have there's so many different spaces we occupy that that can be fruitful points of inquiry, that beyond kind of conversation or written texts, or the written word. And poetry is one of them. Arts are one of them. I would say, particularly for me, there's a few things. I think the background I have in poetry it has kind of tuned me in a lot to how language sounds. I really enjoy kind of like wordplay and puns and how and that type of playfulness with language. And so when I encountered the TSK books, and I encountered a lot of that playfulness there, and kind of using words in unique ways, that really kind of hooked me in a way, and sparked my interest, because that's something where, in poetry, that really kind of really draws me to poetry in general, is just like how words sound, as opposed to necessarily just what they mean.
Right.
And yeah. And I would also say the performative aspect of poetry seems to really resonate with me when it comes to TSK practice as well, of and maybe this is maybe going in more theatrical direction, but one of the things that I really enjoy is readings, and performing poetry, and the way that you can be carried by the music of the words, and by the story, into a completely different persona, really, when you're reading, and that, I think, is really kind of a fun field of exploration for TSK, because then you can start going into like, who am I really? Which one of me is the real me? And yeah, and which time, is the spontaneous, is the me performing this right now the same me that when they stop performing? Those types of questions. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a set of practices that are, very fun to work with in TSK, where they ask you to imagine whatever is going on in your mind is part of the stage play, and to really engage with all of the elements of whatever is manifesting in your awareness at a given time as different players and props and settings, all interacting to create you in that moment. So it's really, I think that speaks to the theatricality that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I know that you teach some mindfulness classes. What do you think is, if you were talking to somebody who's a bit skeptical about TSK and time, space, what do that seems very abstract. So what would you say is valuable or useful about bringing greater attention and mindfulness to particularly those elements of time, space, and knowledge in our lives?
Well, I think it can be a natural extension of some other investigations that might initially resonate with people a little bit more. I know so I'm not officially a full presence mindfulness teacher, so so I don't know if I can necessarily speak to this with 100% authority. Like, it's funny to have a TSK conversation and then talk about authority, right? But the way those courses are taught really start with the senses, and most people are okay, I'll explore the senses, and so it's like, okay, we'll explore the breath. Okay, we all have breath, and it seems valid to kind of explore breathing in itself. Let's explore sight. Let's explore sound. And really, I don't think people challenge it that much. And I think if you're taking them on this journey, then kind of the natural way to go after you go to the senses, like, okay, so let's kind of investigate even further some of the underlying structures, which can really take you into another dimension through the senses. So I would say, like with sight, I mean, maybe the obvious example would be like, okay, so like you're tuning into your sense of sight. Well, now you can also tune into your sense of space and start like your ways of seeing things. And okay, so I look over there and I see a cup on the counter, and isn't it interesting how my vision hones in and identifies that cup on the counter? And then you can do a practice like, okay, try to attend to the space between the cup. And then, so that leads to start, you start kind of playing with space a little bit. And then once you start playing with space, I think the investigation can really continue on to kind of like loosen up the notion of like, well, what space is a medium? What? I mean, space is where things appear. I don't understand. Yeah. You can really start, especially with kind of ongoing practice, you can really start playing with that a little bit and bringing questions to that and some of our assumptions that we automatically, kind of take for granted when we're engaging. Similarly with our conception of linear time, and the way we experience past, present, and future, or the stories we tell about past, present, and future, and starting to really kind of bring into question, well, is that really how the experience of listening to this bell is manifesting to you, for instance? And just kind of like inquiring. It's like, we call it Center for Creative Inquiry. We're inquiring. So that's where I would see the mindfulness connection, and like maybe the way to kind of get into TSK for maybe a mindfulness practitioner that wouldn't usually be used to exploring those dimensions.
That makes sense. I haven't done the full presence mindfulness either. I know that TSK has some exercises that asks you to engage with the senses and possibly experiment with using senses in ways that veer off the habitual patterns and expectations around our use of the senses, just to test the boundaries of the experience and how experience is put together. So it makes sense to me that, starting with the elemental phenomenal presentations, then you can begin to open up into and explore some of the structures behind those presentations as well. So, I think, authoritative or not, I think you made a good case anyway. So, for yourself, are there any aspects of the TSK, the elements, the time, space, or knowledge that have been more, seemingly relevant or engaging with you? Or have you moved through them at different times and different cycles? And are there any particular practices that have been, really resonant for you, or you've gotten the most out of?
Well, I would say I do tend to drift towards time. And I don't know why. I have a preoccupation with time in particular, and being in time, like the sense of real presence in time, as opposed to kind of having a story that kind of attributes a history and or kind of reaches towards the future. So I do tend towards the time component of time space knowledge. And I think part of that is also the way it connects. I mentioned I'm a skillful means practitioner too, and to me the time aspect of TSK ends up kind of dovetailing very nicely with some of the ways of understanding time in skillful means. And so yeah, I think when I'm practicing, that those two go together quite a bit. And And especially with, I mean, skillful means is very interesting in that I know like it might not have been really discussed very much in the series, but it kind of has this view of how to be in the world and kind of use your time well, and it talks about wasting time and things like that, and very literal practices, like tracking awareness, concentration, and energy, and like actually checking in at the same time every day. So it has a very like linear time. So I find that engaging with TSK, the view of time from TSK can really complement that, and so that it doesn't get to where skillful means is only about like being efficient or something, and more about like how am I experiencing and how am I living in my experience in time, and like feeling the flow of the change and dynamic, the dynamic of time really, and kind of really tuning into how it moves rather than kind of like splicing it up like that. So it's like kind of like going back and forth. In terms of practice, so during day to day, I do tend to practice more skillful means practices, and when I'm seated at the doing kind of like formal practice at the moment, I do tend to do full presence mindfulness, which is kind of a set of teachings that is comes out of TSK, but not directly, but it kind of Jack Petrenker has kind of adapted the full presence mindfulness teachings from TSK, but with a slightly different vocabulary to kind of hopefully make it more accessible, as we were kind of speaking before. And for me, the practice that really kind of is the one I like to do is called the marriage of sound and breath. And so kind of like letting the breathing, letting breathing and kind of sound experiences and sound kind of merge together in the throat, and tuning into that. So that would be mine. But I don't know if that's necessarily a time teaching, but
it is. Yeah, I think the marriage of sound and breath I think all of them can impact the whole constellation of things, but it's presented as a time teaching if you take it deep enough to get a different sense of time. Mm-hmm. Would you say, working with these things, that the way that you inhabit or relate to time has shifted for you subtly or even more dramatically?
I think that well, I would say that changes depending on it's like the cop-out answer, right? It's like it changes depending on just with the flow of time. For some reason the story popped into my head that I'll tell, and that is really one of the harder times in my life in terms of physically challenging was right after I had kids. I have twins who are now toddlers. But when they were newborns, having twins is really quite challenging and sleep depriving. And and then I also it's 4 months when they're 4 months old. So they're like, they're waking up all night, and then you're feeding them all the time, and it takes so much care. And then at 4 months, I went back to work too. So I was exhausted. I was sleep deprived, and I remember actually very little about that time in my life, probably because I was so sleep deprived. But I had one very kind of profound moment that I felt like was a spiritual shift for me too. And it was a moment where I felt kind of like at the end of my rope, and I was exhausted. I actually think I was at work. I was kind of like wrapping up the end of the day. And then it like all of the things I had to do, all of the fatigue and exhaustion it just kind of like just appeared in front of me at once, just came crashing down on me at once. And I felt, I can't go on. Like I can't go on. And something in my training and then popped up and was like, that's interesting. What does that mean? What does that mean? You can't go on. Like, do you get to that point of like, I can't do it anymore. I can't go on. And and that's what actually, it started with inquiry. In that moment, I was like, what is the next moment then? Like, is time just going to stop right now? And it didn't. And so in that moment, it was the practice of TSK really, and that question. And then I was like, what does that mean when I say I can't go on? What's going to happen in the next moment? And I felt myself kind of sinking in to the flow of time and realizing it's still flowing. Even as I say this sentence of like, I can't go on, I already did. Before I can even reflect on it, I already did. And sinking into that feeling of time, the heaviness, the rock that it felt like I was holding this big stone, like I can't hold it anymore, right? And I don't know if the rock didn't go away, but I felt like I was less solid. Like I felt like I could, if I just flowed with the time, that I myself can become fluid and just accommodate the rock. And I did go on, and here I am, and it was a very profound moment for me. And it was one where I think like the looseness of TSK kind of, even as a secular kind of path, had almost like the sense of like complete release and complete like just surrendering to kind of time, space, knowledge, almost in the way that you would hear someone, having a spiritual conversion moment through through a more traditional kind of religious practice of like, I just let go and, let myself be supported by God or something like that. It felt that profound to me at the time. And it's stuck with me, even though time has gone on since then, as a good reminder of really the power of the teachings during moments where are really kind of challenging and tough, and can really, and the transformative power of the teachings.
That's really beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. It makes me think of one little section of one of the books. I don't know if it's Knowledge of Time and Space or which one of the books, but they talk about, Tarthang Tulku Rinpoche talks about the role of the supplicant. And, even though TSK doesn't have any hierarchy of teachers, it doesn't have any divine guru figures or God figures or anything like that. And so there's not a traditional bhakti element to it. Rinpoche talks about, nevertheless, there's that spirit of the supplicant, the spirit of the bhakta that opens with a surrender and devotion and trust in something greater. So I think you just gave a very beautiful description of that from within a TSK frame.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, have you noticed your TSK practice, and because you're doing a number of things, it may be really hard to parse out exactly, what. But have you noticed any impact on your relationships, either personal or professional, from working with this kind of material and inquiry?
That's an interesting question. I mean, my first, like, directly, no. I think I have changed. And I mean, I think for sure, I would say that I've become a less judgmental person, and that has improved relationships. In a sense of like, it's much easier to see someone else's perspective when your practice focuses on the fact that your perspective is constructed of labels that you've applied and then decided to labels that you've applied and then decided to abide by as if they were real. So in terms of kind of conflict resolution and things like that, I do think in relationships, I think the practices the TSK practice and vision can help. Directly though, I couldn't think of an example off the top of my head in terms of like the way TSK has directly impacted like my personal relationships and friendships, and that one, maybe I'll pass on that one.
Oh no, that wasn't expecting necessarily any moment where you suddenly thought, oh, I'm going to apply a time practice here and make my relationship better. I mean, no, I figure it's something more subtle, and that you're kind of marinating in these kinds of perspectives and ways of holding and relating to things, and that will eventually seep through into just how we hold our relationships, is my own experience and intuition. But yeah, so we started out a little bit earlier talking about the Center for Creative Inquiry, and I think I mentioned I was involved in the early days when they were first making some programs and doing some offerings. I was involved then, before kind of life took me away from direct engagement of those things for a few years. So ultimately, this may be a question for Jack that I should have asked him before, but I'm going to ask you if that's all right.
Okay.
And so, what is your understanding of the vision for the Center for Creative Inquiry? What's its mission? Who is it trying to speak to? Who's it trying to reach and help?
Yeah, so the Center for Creative Inquiry is really, at its core, it's an organization that's designed to share the TSK teachings to as wide of an audience as possible. But it's a little bit more than that, I would say. It's really an organization that's been founded to really see how we can engage with the world from a new vantage point, of really having a new vision of how to kind of engage with the world and the issues that feel kind of urgent and important to our lives in the world. And so I think CCI at the moment is kind of going through a transitional phase right now where kind of really thinking about how to reach out and engage with new audiences that maybe haven't found other kind of spiritual traditions maybe accessible or too dogmatic to really be able to speak to those issues in an open way and in a light way and
kind of connected to that, what do you think are the short and the long-term goals that you're holding right now for CCI? What are you working on right now, and where would you like to go?
Right now, the kind of primary goals are really kind of expanding the community and really kind of engaging the existing community of TSK practitioners in a way where they really feel like they have a home. I think there's been a lot of TSK practitioners who have been kind of scattered throughout the country and maybe even the world, who really haven't had much opportunity to regularly connect with each other and really feel like a community, and being really able to kind of like share each other's insights and experiences and really kind of be able to enhance our practice that way. And so one of the goals of CCI is to kind of create a platform and a kind of a home for those existing TSK practitioners, as well as opening doors and avenues for new engagement from kind of like a new generation or a younger audience. So that would be one. And then also I think a lot of where CCI was focusing before was teaching and teaching TSK conferences and workshops, and then developing the full presence mindfulness method of TSK, and that is still going to be going on. And Jack Petranker is really the person still spearheading the development of full presence mindfulness and the teaching of that, but also kind of providing a platform for TSK content to be shared as well, and in different fields of inquiry. So we're not necessarily always kind of having a reading based, kind of a courses based on reading the books, but also exploring in other ways through the arts and through body, through movement practice, and through poetry, and potentially also like kind of like social engagement and engagement with the world.
That's great. TSK tends to resist formalization or institutionalization. It tries to retain a sense of fundamental openness and fluidity and unsettledness. And so, do you find that it doesn't set up a list of principles or ethical rules or no catechism, nothing like that? So, do you find that poses challenges to forming a community or around it?
I don't. I think it depends on the type of community, but I think really I would say it's more about providing a playground.
Nice, yeah.
People can come and they can they can go on the swings, they can go on the slide. You can tell I have toddlers, right?
Yeah,
right. They can go on the little spinny thing if they want, and just like allow, kind of creating a space where, online space where people can really come together in whatever ways they wish, and trying to really keep it open in terms of like, well, it's not like you have to, well, this is a place where you come and only take 6-week courses, or this is a place where you come and you only do, a set, like, we only do one thing. Just kind of like creating options for people to connect with each other, and if and maybe just putting a more, instead of effort into kind of like leading initiatives, or saying like, okay, well, now we're all going to come to this one retreat or something like that. Just kind of having more of a bottom up approach, where it's more of like a gathering process of like, oh, okay, so this cool thing is going on. Why don't you maybe we'll announce that, or, oh, like this is going on in Germany. Let's like, bring that in too, so people know about it. So I think it's more of like kind of a network rather than like a institution.
Mm-hmm.
So a network that is also a playground.
That makes sense. Yeah. Before I discovered TSK, I was involved with the Krishnamurti community. Mm-hmm. And, Krishnamurti similarly didn't want a formal institution around him, didn't want a fixed set of teachings or dogmas, but wanted to keep things open. So they've also had that kind of challenge. But I think similarly to what you're describing here, mostly the way they've handled it is by developing places, structures that provide for engagement without a lot of top-down enforcement of exactly how to be in those spaces. So it sounds like a similar path that CCI is possibly treading there. There seems to be, a lot of social tension right now, confusion, polarization, fragmentation. You kind of spoke to that a little bit earlier in our talk. So in your own social engagement or activism, or just more generally, are there any things that TSK offers uniquely that you think could speak to what's going on currently in our society and offer something useful, offer some wisdom?
Absolutely. I think that in terms of the methodology is very I think I've used the word light before, but returning to the question, returning to inquiry. I think right now there is a lot of like facing issues, and then there's this angst that can arise from not having the answer, and not or just seeing the magnitude of the issues, and then not really feeling like, oh my gosh, how are we going to solve racism when we're talking about, like it's being pointed out that like almost every social structure that we have has some form of racism embedded in it, that has been, kind of either papered over or ignored in some way. And then I think you can face that and be like what is there to do? And I think there, like that kind of enormity of the problems, let's say, can really create some defensiveness, like positioning, and really thinking, okay, so this is, I need to get it right. I need to be perfect. I need to kind of individually, do everything, a certain way, so that I'm not making the problem worse and doing everything I can to dismantle it. And I think that can be overwhelming. So the first answer I would give is just like in the methodology of questioning and being comfortable with the unknown, and just allowing the question to go further, and in a playful way. It's like you can engage with something, you can deeply engage with something without having a definitive answer. You can change your actions, you can transform your way of being, you can transform your behaviors and attitudes without there being an answer of like, okay, am I a good person now? And so I think that's one of the things that TSK really does, is that methodology of like, okay, we are going to engage these issues, but there's no judgment there. There's no, you can engage with it, and it doesn't like just completely destroy your confidence and self-esteem and sense of self-worth, to really engage the issues, either from the enormity of the problems or from your own like being implicated. And so that's kind of like going into the second thing, which I think is what I notice, especially, and I'll use racism because that's the example I used. I think after the murder of George Floyd, there were many white people who started kind of engaging with their own kind of ways of their own privilege, and taking advantage of things that they didn't even realize that they were taking advantage of. Mm-hmm. And I think but a lot of times the way of engaging that is with guilt, or even, and the other way is just saying, like, when someone points this out, like, oh, did you notice that like the history that you learned in school was all centered on like white people, like and the kind of habitual response seems to be to either shut down and deny it, and just like, no, I don't want to look at that, I don't want to question that. History is history, right? History doesn't change. And kind of like really kind of just clinging to the story that was taught, and that way of structuring reality in a very strong way, or engaging with it and then just like, I'm a bad person. I've said this a few times, like good person, bad person, like, oh my God, I've done all this, like, like really problematic things for a long time. And I think TSK has an answer, or, to both of those. When you're not, not engaging it, be like, okay, so we're learning to question the way we've structured things. And like, maybe the way that you were taught history was not something you even ever thought to question, and now it is. Like, someone's pointing that out. Oh, isn't that interesting? That curiosity drives it forward and really actually creates a possibility, if we stay in that curious space, that we can, as a society, start dismantling it and find a different way. And then personally, it also allows us to like not think that that one single identity, that this one single pattern or way of seeing that we've done at a singular moment somehow defines a person at the center that is immutable, unchangeable. That's back to the time teachings, right? Like everything is constantly changing. There is an opportunity in every moment to spontaneously manifest goodness. And so, it creates kind of a self-confidence and a lack of, kind of a path to overcome our guilt, to really start saying, okay, I did that shitty thing, or sorry, I shouldn't have used that.
No, you can't, no problem.
Okay. Like I did that thing, and I'm ashamed of it or whatever. It's like, no, it's just like, oh, like there was a pattern and I was doing it, and now I have an opportunity right now to do a different pattern or to make a different option, and then you just do it, and and it just leaves the extra stuff out. It leaves the guilt out, but still kind of keeps the juice of the change, which is what we want, right?
Yeah, that's well said. And there are aspects of TSK which are resonant with some of the most esoteric and deepest parts of advanced Buddhist teachings. So it really has that depth and resonance there. But I think it also has a way of its point of entry is such that it can begin to take root at just very ordinary levels of our existence and begin to work there initially. What if you've had experience with this? Any of the younger people coming to CCI or Nyingma and engaging with TSK, have you found anything that has been especially resonant for younger people, or what's been more engaging for them, more of a way to get them involved and interested?
Yeah, I would say that kind of aspects that people have been really interested in. It has been, I think one thing is community. The sense of community engagement, or seeing structures and patterning and on a collective level instead of an individual level, is something that seems to be very strong with millennials and Gen Z. Maybe kind of like decentering the, okay, this is my individual kind of journey with how I view the world, but maybe more engaging with like, how can we collectively change like our ways of viewing the world and engaging with it. So I would say that's one change. I definitely think people are interested in issues of identity and inclusiveness, and not only, and again, I think there's a difference also in how identity is viewed, that is particularly interesting and relevant for a TSK perspective, which is more of identity as culturally constructed or collectively constructed, rather than like, this is who I am because I was born that way. And, it's just like, I have this identity because the net that I'm immersed in has, kind of conditioned me to be that way. And I think that people are interested in those issues. And I think TSK really, in its like basically decentering of the self, like really is quite compatible with that, and really looking at, okay, so we're looking at structures. Now let's look at these other structures too, like the way we structure reality through space and time. So yeah, so I think those would be the areas that I see kind of most frequently cited as that exciting for the newer generation.
I spoke to Adrian recently, Adrian Roman, who's also going to be appearing in the series, and he mentioned I think a TSK kind of publication that was distributed in maybe a LGBTQ festival or something like that. I'm not sure if I'm recalling that correctly, but I think he talked about that. But are there any efforts on the part of CCI right now to kind of engage, the Gen Z or millennial culture around issues or events that might be, of relevance to them that TSK could speak to?
Well, right now we're not at the moment focusing on events, although we're hoping to create like infrastructure where the events can move forward. But yeah, the one he was referring to, I think, it was a zine. It was a little zine called Invisible Mind, but Invisible Mind. And where when you read through it, it's kind of almost a meditative experience. It gives different instructions. So at the moment, we don't have any events planned surrounding those types of things, but we do have another publication we're working on that is geared towards children, towards kind of like a middle school aged age group. That's a workbook that's kind of like a mindfulness TSK workbook to help gear towards kids. So that's, I guess, technically not Gen Z. I don't know if they're still considered Gen Z at this point, whatever,
Right.
The unnamed generation. In terms of how we're intending to engage millennials and Gen Z, we're kind of focusing on online content right now and launching kind of a new branding and a new website that will feature content from different contributors, kind of emphasizing, as I've said before, these different fields of inquiry. So we're hoping to have poetry, short videos, and things like that, and really trying to develop a more diverse and inclusive contributor base for those TSK teachings, so that that the material will also resonate with a diverse and inclusive group.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much. It's really been a delight to talk to you. I've loved hearing about both your experience and all of the things that are cooking at CCI.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the wonderful questions. It was really enjoyable to be able to kind of think deeply about some of these questions about myself and my practice too. So really appreciate the time here.